All right. The format for this meeting is a 10-minute speaker, our secretary's announcements, a coffee and snack break, and our main speaker, our first speaker for tonight is Chris M.
My name is Chris Miller, and I'm an alcoholic. Just want to look out over the fellowship for a minute. You know, I've got lots of good friends in here and lots of lifelong friends in here. And it wasn't like that when I got here. You know, I had used everybody up. Parents didn't know what to do with me. I had a 7-year-old at home. She had long since kicked me out because she didn't want to see me die. And I had no place to go. And I was lonely, and I was sad, and I was tired of living the way that I was living. And I'm not going to go through my whole drunk-a-log. I did grow up in an alcoholic environment at home. My father was an alcoholic. He was also a minister. And that I'll talk about that more in a minute. But, you know, I had my work environment. I wasn't a very good worker. I wasn't a very good son. I wasn't a great brother. And I wasn't a great dad. You know, I had a 7-year-old son whom I adored, but I just didn't know how to be a dad. I would get him every other weekend, and I wouldn't look forward to seeing him because he would cut into my drinking and my using. And, you know, it got to the point where I felt like I didn't want to be here anymore. I had that alcoholic voice in my head telling me that one more time that everybody would be a lot better off if you weren't around. And I'm glad I didn't listen to that voice. You know, I was really blowing it at work the last 3 months before I got sober. I went into work one morning and late as usual, and my boss called me in his office and he sat me down and he had me listen to a recording of myself the night before calling in sick. And I had called in sick, didn't realize I had called in sick, and heard myself slurring on this answering machine. And he asked me, "Are you okay?" And my best thinking, my absolute best thinking was, no, I have a brain tumor. Apparently, you need documentation when you claim you have a brain tumor. So I knew the jig was up, and the jig was going to be up really quickly. And he took me off work, and I had to go see somebody, a psychiatrist, and he nailed me. And I had to sign documentation that I wouldn't drink or use for a year. And I felt at peace for the first time in a long time, like the jig was up, you know, like it was okay. And those thoughts of suicide, you know, I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I did a 28-day stay at Del Amo Hospital. And I did the outpatient program at Torrance Memorial. Wasn't called Thelma then. My sobriety date is November 13th, 2002. So it'll be 21 years and a little bit less than a month. And I came in, and the very first meeting I've ever sat in, I felt like I belonged. You guys were talking about stuff that I never would have said from a podium. And it made me feel like, you know, like I'd arrived at home, like I finally figured out what was wrong with me. And what a relief that is, you know, and the gifts of this program absolutely keep giving. I have been through some rough things in sobriety. You know, I told you earlier that my father was an alcoholic, and it took me a long time to understand step 2 and step 3. God didn't come easily to me. It had to be of my own understanding. It wasn't a religious God that I have in my life today, and my God has evolved since then. I've done some things in sobriety that I'm not proud of, other than the fact that I met your 45-minute speaker when I had 4.5 months of sobriety. She had 18 years. She taught me that very famous step. And it's been an amazing ride ever since. I remember going to the early morning meeting after we'd been seeing each other for quite some time, and we said that, you know, we were engaged and we were going to get married, and I could hear the eyes rolling in the room. And here we are 18 years later, and I'm married to the most amazing human being I've ever been with in my entire life. And I said earlier that the thoughts of suicide were coming on a daily basis, and I would have missed out on my son, that 7-year-old I was talking about. He became an Eagle Scout. He graduated from high school. He went on to college. He's married now. He owns his own house in Washington, and I would have missed out on all of that. The very first meeting I ever went to, I heard, "Strap in, this is going to be the adventure of your life." And that was absolutely true. I've had more fun in sobriety than I have 10 to 15 years previous to coming here. And don't get me wrong, alcohol was fun at first, then it was fun with consequences, and then it was just consequences. It was just my typical day was to drive to work in the morning, dry heave on the way to work. I would get to work, I would white knuckle it, and I would promise myself throughout that day, do not drink, I'm not gonna drink, I'm not gonna drink. And by 5 o'clock, my car would be in front of that liquor store one more time, and I would be drunk by 10. And I would say, okay, I'll do this, I'll try it again tomorrow. And it was just a vicious cycle that happened for years. And I'm glad that I don't have to live that way anymore. And that was another thing I heard when I got here is, let us love you until you love yourself. Because I didn't like the man I was when I walked in here. I had a lot of shame, I had a lot of guilt. And I love my life today, and I love the life that I'm leaving. It's all about God, it's all about you guys, and it's all about doing the right thing. And, I just, I searched high and low very early on in my sobriety for the reasons why I was an alcoholic. And, I got really into Ancestry.com, and I'm half French. So I'm figuring the French side of me is not the one that I need to worry about. And I traced my great-great-great-great-grandfather back on my father's side, and that was the guy who came over from England, and it's that guy. I know it's that guy. Like I say, I love my life today, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And if you're new and you're sitting in this room and you have a problem with God, I understand. I had that problem too. And, you got to give this thing away to keep it. I had to learn some really hard lessons in sobriety. I was there for when my parents both passed away. What a gift that was for me. And some people get here a little bit too late for that, and I'm sorry that's happened. But I got to make amends to those people. And when they finally passed, it was completely clear with them. They knew how I felt about them, and they knew how I felt about about myself. They loved me just as much, and there was nothing that needed to be said. And I've received so many gifts from this program. I love you guys. I love this program, and that's enough out of me. If I'm a little bit short, I'm sorry, but thank you for having me tonight.
All right, guys. We're gonna start this off with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, now our main speaker will share his or her experience, strength, and hope with us. Please join me in welcoming Beverlie M.
Okay. Beverlie alcoholic. Okay. All my friends are here. Nobody's judging me, right? Right. Okay. Thank you for asking me to speak tonight. I'm really excited to be here, and it's really great to see Clarity House is in the house, and everybody else that's new, welcome. It's a very big deal to make it through the doors alive, that we're here and we're alive. And I'll start with my sobriety date. My sobriety date is November 1st, 1984. I got sober here in Hermosa Beach, coming to this American Martyrs meeting, many years of my sobriety. You already know that I 13th stepped my husband. I did not, just for the record. I got his sponsor's permission, I got my sponsor's permission, I waited till he worked the steps, halfway through his 9th step, so I just want you to know, halfway through his 9th step, that's the rule. Anyway, there's on page 21 in the big book, it says, it kind of describes how I drank. It says disgustingly, even dangerously antisocial. And that pretty much describes how I drank from the gate. Even before the gate, I was that kid that was looking for trouble. And I would take the hall pass and go steal everybody else's Twinkies and then go in the bathroom and eat them. And I'm sure their parents, they were like, my mom doesn't love me today because I didn't get a Twinkie, but I needed the sugar, like I needed out, and sugar was the first love, I went straight for the sugar. I was told when I was 5 that I was adopted, and I did not have a normal response to that. I'm like, who didn't want me? And I sized up that I must be unlovable, and therefore, I wasn't going to give my parents the satisfaction of loving them. These people that were gracious enough to take me, I was pissed at them for God knows what reason. And I made my life's mission, my only goal in life, was to locate those people who gave me up and figure out why they did that and what was so inherently wrong with me that they gave me away. Self-obsessed to the core from the gate. And so I was not a pleasant child to be around. It wasn't an easy household to be living in either. I was being raised in a house where alcohol reigned supreme, and there was no touchy-feely love kind of stuff going on. And it was mostly our family thrived on humiliating each other and embarrassing each other. I know the dinner table was hell on earth. I'd be called names, and I just wanted out from the minute I got there. I was like, get me out of here. And when I was 17, I left. I wasn't able to follow rules very well. I would sneak out in the middle of the night when I was a teenager, and I was, I'll start with where I found alcohol. I was always taking sips of alcohol from my parents' drinks, but the time I got drunk, it was like, oh, this is it. I had found nirvana, and I went straight to throwing up, passing out, and I did that every single time I drank. I just didn't know, I didn't have an off switch, and I couldn't predict what would happen once I started. And I would get drunk at school. I would get people I would go outside, and I would get to the grocery store, and I'd get them to spot liquor for me, and then I would go on field trips drunk. And it was one time on a field trip, I went to go find more booze, and I don't know what happened. 2 girls left with 2 guys, but the 2 other guys got on the bus. So we had the right number count, just the wrong people. And so I remember just being all passed out in drama class, and they all came in looking for me to find out the story, and I've never gotten sober so quick in my life. I was like, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no sir. Yes, they left the bus, no, that was what I was doing. So I love that no matter how many times you can practice what you're going to say, nothing of what you think you're going to say is going to come out of your mouth. So right now you're getting a version I've never even heard. I'm trying really hard to okay, focus. I thought it was funny this week in a meeting I was in, a girl said, I have this Al-Anon friend, she didn't really drink or anything, but she went to this party and they had lined out some lines of Coke. And just to be polite, she had a line. And I said in the middle of the meeting, well, that's what happened with men and me. I was just being polite. Sorry, honey. So, I left home when I was 17. I wanted to go to college. I intended to go to college, but I was already drinking in the morning, or I was too hungover from the night before. And I had this game I would play with myself that said alcoholics, only alcoholics drink before 10 a.m. And so I'd be watching the clock and waiting till 10 a.m. so I could drink. And then at nights I was in the bars. I was in all the local bars, Red Onion, Cassidy's, Orville and Wilbur's. And I would pick fights. I was that kind of, once you put alcohol in, I got really nasty. And I remember some girl in Orville and Wilbur's, she was dressed all in white, she was dirty dancing, and I remember just talking her right over here, to some other girls that would listen, and I'm like, ugh. And then I just walked over and I poured my drink all over her. And she came out swinging, and she got kicked out of the bar, but her boyfriend bought me a drink. So that's the way I drank. I got in fights down at the pier. And what started happening, though, is that I could drink and drink and drink and not get drunk. And alcohol was starting to not work anymore, and it was terrifying me, because the one thing I absolutely needed was to get out, of how I was feeling. And around that time, where I was just in a lot of bad things were happening in my life, but they weren't a direct result of my actual drinking. They were more like, I was so hungover at work that I wouldn't pay attention when they had promoted me. I was at a bank by then. I was working as a bank teller, and they put me in new accounts. And I was too proud and too effed up to ask for actual directions when I wasn't understanding what they were telling me. So I just shoved all of the interest-bearing CDs into a drawer, and you can't do that in a bank. And so they, instead of firing me, they demoted me back to teller. And, like guys would come in, carfuls of guys came through the drive-through once, and they're like, we're on our way to a concert, you want to come? And I turned around, I'm like, can I leave? And I just hopped in a car full of guys and left. And nobody, that's the kind of reckless behavior I had. I didn't tell anybody where I was going. I took off with people I didn't know. I would be the drunk person that was in the bar, crawling across the floor in a mini skirt and high heels, go into the bathroom and be throwing up, to the point where I was in there so long, the bouncer would go try to find out who came with me so they could go find them and see what was wrong with me. And it was just more and more of the same. And then I ended up moving back home, because I remember the roommates I had, I was a horrible roommate, just absolute horrible roommate, horrible daughter. I couldn't have healthy relationships with men or women. And as a bank teller, I met this guy, and this guy was super spiritual and really at ease in his own skin. And we started going out, and it turned out he was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he had 2 years. I don't know why he was dating a drunk like me, but he had 2 years, and he was planting little seeds in my brain. He was saying things to me like, there'll come a time when you'll swear you won't drink and you'll find yourself drunk. And I remember the moment it happened. I even locked by then I was working at a bar at nighttime, and I remember locking my wallet in the trunk so that I wouldn't drink. And the next thing you know, the lights were coming on and somebody had to drive me home. And there was that split second where I said to myself, oh my God, I swore I wasn't going to drink. What happened? And so I got stuck on this boat during the 4th of July with 3 sober people and me, and the rest of the boat was all drinking but these 3 sober people. And I was there for like 8 hours, and they extracted a promise from me that I would go to a meeting. So I did. I went to Al-Anon. And I figured it was everybody else's fault. So these beautiful women in Al-Anon just absolutely, and men, and just absolutely embraced me. And they listened to me whine and complain and act like a victim. And then finally, I did get a sponsor in there. And finally, she's like, why? I have a feeling. Why don't we talk about your drinking now? And I want you to write a drunk-a-log and tell me what happened. And so I would do things like, I had a real big problem with pyromania. I would light things on fire. would hitchhike. My friend and I hitchhiked up and down the beach and went home with some guy who promised us booze. She was hanging out with him in another room, and I was really drunk, and I found a big thing of matches, and I ended up lighting his whole wall of curtains on fire and just watching them burn. And when they started to smell the smoke, he ran out going, "Oh my God, what are you doing? This is my mother's house." So I was that friend that would get you in fights or get you in trouble. And so writing all this stuff, I almost lit the neighbor's house down too. Luckily, we got that under control. And so there we go, losing the train of thought. Writing a drunkalog. So I was writing down all these things, like, lit the neighbor's house on fire, went off with this person, and all the bad things that were happening. And I didn't think anything of it while I was writing it. But when I sat across from her at a restaurant and had to say them all out loud, and she looked me dead in the eye, and she goes, "And you have any doubts?" And it was the first time my brain understood that I was the alcoholic. Up until then, I was in denial. It was all your fault. Nobody understood me. I really felt like the loneliest person in the world, like I could stand in a room full of people and scream and nobody could hear me. I was so broken and so lonely, and I felt, before walking through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, just dead inside, and I also felt very used up, and I felt dirty, and I felt ashamed, and I felt unforgivable. And so when that moment of clarity happened, it was like, I think we all get that moment in our life, and it's whether we take it or not. That moment of clarity happened, and I was like, that makes all the sense in the world. I finally have an answer to what's wrong with me, because up until then I could not explain to you what was wrong with me. People would say many times, "Beverlie, what is wrong with you?" And I had no answer, because I just thought I had a mental illness, and that everybody else knew what they were doing but me, and I couldn't control it, so therefore I couldn't explain it either. And so I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and for the very first time I stood up and I introduced myself as an alcoholic. And then it got hard, because then I took away the one thing that had been working my whole life. And now I had to face life without alcohol, and it got terrifying. I didn't know how on earth I could do life without alcohol. It never even crossed my mind that you could do life without alcohol. I got sober in November, and all I could think about was, how am I going to get through summer without beer? And so it was scary. And I had a hard time even going down the liquor aisle at the grocery store. I'm working at an escrow place. I'm in like my first, I wouldn't say first month of working there, and I'm in my first several days, of sobriety. And I'm on the phone with the Al-Anon AA sponsor, and I'm going, "Oh my God, he's going to leave me, and my truck's going to break down, and I don't have any money, and I don't know how I'm going to make my bills, and I don't know how I'm going to pay rent." And she'd go, "Where are you?" And I go, "I'm at work." And she'd say, "Then work." And she'd hang up. And I'm like, okay. And so this one lady heard me, because I'm very loud, as you can tell, and she came out of her office, and she leaned down, and she goes, "I don't normally do this, but I just want you to know I kind of overheard your conversation, and I can tell you're struggling, and I just want you to know I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you need me, I'm in my office." And I ran after her, and totally dramatically, and I begged her to be my sponsor. And I was crying, and I need help, and I can't do this. And she said, "Are you willing to go to any length for victory over alcohol?" And I said, "Yes, I will do anything." If that woman had asked me to bounce a ball down PCH for 2 hours, I would have done it. If she would have said that, would have kept me sober today, because I did not trust this brain. I did not know how to stay sober. And I trusted, when I walked in the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, that you guys knew. When I would go to Al-Anon, I would listen. There was, at the Hermosa Beach Alano Club, so there was a Sunday night meeting, and in the back room there's an Al-Anon meeting, in the front room there's an AA meeting. And I remember walking, I thought the Al-Anon meetings at that time were so boring. And I heard all this laughter coming from the other room. So I'd walk over there and I'd stand at the door, and Gordon Bellinger was up there, and he had the whole room laughing. And I thought to myself, he sounds drunk, and they're all lying. You know, there's no way people are laughing if they're not drinking. And then I left and went and got drunk. But that stayed with me, that whole room of people were laughing, and they were sober. They said they were sober, and I believed them after I walked in the doors. And so I trusted this one woman, and I kind of made a deal with God because I didn't really trust anybody. And I said that I would do anything she said. I would believe that was a divine God speaking through her. And I'm grateful that no one said, you have to believe in my God, you know, because I had a God that I was kind of hiding from, that I thought I needed punishing from. And so I didn't trust my God. And people would say things like, you know, just use good orderly direction, or group of drunks as a higher power until you can find your own and establish, you know, figure out what you believe. And that really helped a lot, because no one was telling me, like in church, they were telling me exactly how I needed to believe in God, and I had questions. And so I'm grateful that when I came into AA, there was somebody that became my sponsor to give me direction, because I didn't know what I was doing, and they led me directly to the book to read the big book. They told me to go get a commitment, and back then you could smoke in meetings, and so I would sit in the back, and I didn't even smoke, but I would wash all the ashtrays, and I would be crying out of gratitude that they let me wash their ashtrays. And I was told to never say no. Get in the car. We're going to visit Louie in the hospital. And I'm like, I don't know Louie. And they're like, get in the car. You're going with us. You don't get a choice. Like when I was new, you didn't get an option. It wasn't like, how are you feeling? Nobody cared how you were feeling. They were just, do what we do. We don't, and by doing the action, the feelings will come. You know, I had to act as if, so that I could then get that on the inside. I had, you know, I'm anxious, as you can tell. So I'm just, my early sobriety was all about lots and lots and lots of meetings. I would go to the early morning meeting because my head would wake up way before I did. And then I would go to the noon meeting for 45 minutes during my lunch break. And then I would go to a 5:30 commuter meeting. And then I would go to a 7:30 or an 8 o'clock meeting. And then I would just hold on for the rest of the evening, you know, because I was suffered from a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic attacks. And I got here when I was 21. And so there wasn't a lot of young people. There are still some people in this room today that were very young when I was new, and they're still here today. And you know, what I've noticed over these years is that the people that were doing the work back then are the people that are still sober today. So if you want to know how to stay sober, do what we do. You know, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to show you how I was taught how to do it. And my sponsor would meet with me once a week, and we would read the book out loud, and we would work the steps, and I had to do that inventory that everybody's so afraid of, you know, that it just, you know, I had to pour out that embarrassing stuff that made me feel really dirty and shameful. And I had a really hard time with always thinking so poorly about myself. Sometimes I still struggle with that. And but for a whole week after I did my fifth step, a week went by, and I wasn't crucifying myself for what a piece of crap I was. And I went, that, and it didn't happen suddenly. There wasn't any bright lights or anything, but it was like things were quieting down. My brain was quieting down. I wasn't as anxious. And I did track down that biological mother. I met her when I was 18, and she was in another state. She came. I also had a biological sister, and she came and we got to meet, and she was a raging alcoholic. and I really got to see where I was heading. And we hung out for about a year. We were hanging out in a bar, and we got in this big old fight in a bar, and we didn't speak for a year. And in that year, she got sober, and I got sober. And it was really beautiful that I got to walk that path of sobriety with my biological mom for 26 years before she passed away from cancer. And she also helped me track down my biological dad, who she had had a one-night stand with, and all she knew was the neighborhood and the last name. And we knocked on doors, and we found some neighbors that knew the parents, and we called, and I got my dad on the phone, and he said, "I'm sorry, I really don't think you're mine, but we'll write letters." And he was really nice, though. And he was a preacher, and he was married with 4 children. And about 30 minutes later, he called back and he said, "My wife, Joan, wants to speak with you." And she got on that phone and she said, "If you're Vince's daughter, you're my daughter. And we want to meet you, and we're prepared to put the 4 kids in the car and drive to California tonight and meet you." And for 43 years, that woman embraced me as her own. She passed away last year. And I'm just, I've had the most beautiful experiences because I stayed sober. Like Chris mentioned, we got married and found the love of my life when I was 39. So girls, do not despair. And I met him in the rooms. And so, anything's possible. I also had a prior marriage, and I'll tell you about how not to do something. I would not listen to my higher power, to this quiet voice that was trying to warn me. I would not listen to my sponsor, who gently was trying to guide me in the right direction. I would not listen to the friends who were terribly alarmed and worried for my safety. I was sober, and I was in self-will run riot. And I, within 4 months of knowing this guy, got married, got pregnant the wedding night, not by accident, I guess, if you can call it an accident. And then I felt like I had to stay. And he had already shown me that he was violent, that he was a sociopath, and that I was in danger, but I stayed because I thought marriage was forever. My parents were happily married for 68 years, madly in love till the end. And I thought you had to stay. And then I stopped talking about it. I was going to less and less meetings, and I stopped telling people what was happening to me. And I started stealing because my disease is going to find a way out. It's just, and it was like I was screaming for help, and so I was going to grocery stores, and I was stealing stuff, and I was going in other stores, I was stealing things. And I remember going to a meeting and getting up at a podium, because they were all podium meetings, and it just came out. I'm like, "I'm stealing," and they're like, "Well, just stop." Pretend somebody's with you at all times and just stop doing that. And I'm a good AA. I would literally take it back and pay it. I would say, "I just stole this, and here you go. I need to pay you for it," because it was like this cycle of abuse was happening, and I was wilting, and I was just getting worse and worse. And so I finally, it was bad. It got really bad, and I will pay for that for the rest of my life, for being weak and for being, for not listening. And my son, when he was 3.5 years of age, got ripped out of my arms and put in a foster care because that ex-husband made so many fake calls to the Department of Children's Services that they got a bad social worker one night and they just took him. And it took 5.5 months to get him back. And it was, if I had not been here, I don't know how I survived it, because it felt like someone had ripped off my arm without anesthesia, and I was just living to get him back. And I lost my mind. Like, I literally went insane. And people in AA just let me blabber, and they held on to me, and they walked me around, and they took me to meetings, and they helped me get a lawyer, and they helped me do all of these things. But if I hadn't shown up for that, so there's a lot of damage you can do sober if you're not doing the suggested steps on a regular basis, which is, how I lead my life today is I get up, I pray, I meditate. I believe that if 3 people tell me the exact same thing, that is God desperately trying to get my attention. And I believe it now. I don't stray too far from the whole routine, I go to the same meetings. I let people know who I am. I tell on my disease. If I'm having thoughts, I have to tell on it. And then, got out of that, and many, many, many years later got to find the most beautiful, kindest man that I've ever known in my entire life. And I don't know why God was so good to me to give me somebody like Chris, because I certainly didn't deserve it. Not with who I was when I was out there. But God has done for me what I couldn't do for myself. I get to show up every single day and be a good wife, a good mother to that 32-year-old boy. I get to be a stepmother to a boy I adore. And I tell him all the time that I'm his biggest fan. And I've gotten a front row seat to so many women. I get to watch their lives unfold and get beautiful, and they start to glow, and they start to radiate, and they help others. And that is the highlight of my life, is being a sponsor and watching other women turn around and give this thing back. And my whole life is about showing up and giving back. You say, that you call me and I pick up the phone. I go to work on Mondays. Like my boss can count on me. 30 years I've been at that same job with that boss, and he can count on me. And I have to know when I'm not spiritually fit. And if I'm not spiritually fit, I can't go into a place where there's alcohol. The book's really clear about that. And sometimes I'm not. I don't care how much time I have. Sometimes I am not spiritually fit. And I remember there was a Christmas party, and we were supposed to go in a limo, and these are heavy drinkers. And everybody was meeting at the Manhattan Beach office and getting in the limo to go to the Pasadena office. And I knew I couldn't get in the limo. Like I knew I couldn't be stuck with those people for that many hours with all that alcohol. And so I bailed at the last second, and my boss was super disappointed in me. And I had to tell him the next day, I said, I wasn't okay, and I knew it, I'm sorry. And he understands, and there was a time when I was 25 years sober that I had put people on a pedestal, they'd kind of fallen off the pedestal, and I was like disappointed in everybody and everything, and I wanted out. And I didn't know if I could stay sober one more day. I'd kind of just went, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And I left work, and I went home, and I packed all my stuff up, but my boss, he knows 2 sober people in the world, and he called them, and he said, there's something wrong with her. I'm afraid she's going to drink. And he doesn't know anything about AA, and he's a drinker, but he tracked those people down, and Mike Watson was one of the people he called, and Mike Watson was getting cancer treatment, and he's sitting there hooked up getting cancer treatment, and he picks up the phone, and he called me and talked me down, because I couldn't even call my sponsor. When it says there's mental blank spots, that we are incapable of keeping ourselves sober, all the self-knowledge in the world does not keep me sober. I have to have a spiritual connection, and that connection is what keeps me from my hand reaching out and grabbing. Or my head will tell me, you were so young, wasn't that bad? Or maybe now with all your knowledge, you could do it. It's always going to find a way in. It's always going to get me to a weakened state when I'm alone and I'm listening. If I'm giving this thing an audience, I'm in trouble. And so I have to be very, very, very vigilant to this day. I don't take it for granted that I'm sober. I don't think that it's something I am personally doing that's keeping me sober. I believe there's a higher power working for my better good. If I'm in partnership, we have all the power in the world. Yet we're powerless over alcohol, but where our power comes from is when we plug into the source. You buy a lamp, you can spend $100 on a really beautiful lamp, but if you don't plug it into a source of electricity, you've got nothing. And my source of electricity is you guys, and it's meetings, and it's working with others, because, is that 10 minutes or 10 seconds? You're done. Bring the, what's that show? Gong Show. Anyway, okay, so there is just some I'll talk about some amends. Let me just skip over to amends. I've done all the steps. I've paid all the money back. You know, the money I stole when I was out there drinking and sober. And by the way, don't take a treasurer commitment if you have no money, because here's something I used to do. I would take the money and I would write little IOUs, and I would say, I'm just borrowing it. And pretty soon there was nothing in the treasury money. It was just all IOUs. And I had to come clean in a meeting, and I was very new when I did this, very new. And instead of like berating me and telling me what a horrible person I was, they just passed the basket around me when the 11th tradition came by. I mean, we are just so forgiving here. And then now, if I ever get elected to be treasurer, I tell them I once stole all the treasury money, and you need to know that if you're going to hire me as your, if you're going to, put me in office. So, the amends that I made to my mother, I'll just talk about that for a minute. And that amends, my sponsor said I wasn't ready to make the amends I made, and I said, yes, I am. And I went over to my parents while they were in a jacuzzi drinking, and I poured out my heart and all my sorries. And they're like, are you done? Because you left some things out. And I walked away so pissed off. And technically, I did my amends. But spiritually, I was nowhere near doing my amends. And the people, my sponsor, and the people in my life held me accountable, and they're like, you have to read some more books on spirit. You have to enlarge your spiritual life because you don't get it yet, what you did to her. And when I did get what I did to her, it came over me so profound and deeply that I knew exactly what I needed to say, and I wrote her an amends letter. And it wasn't when she read it that I was relieved of that. It was when I sent it, because I finally I knew what I did, and God showed me what I did. And we ended up having a beautiful relationship, and when she passed away, she had that amends letter still in her drawer and next to her bed. And some of the really cool things Chris and I have done in sobriety, which is I didn't go to college, as I told you. So he and I went to college a couple of years ago, and we both got 2 degrees at Harbor College. And how awesome was that? It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying to walk on campus at 50 some odd years of age, and it just took taking one class. We just did one class at a time, and after that one class, we did one more class until we got a degree, and how that was the best. And we take a lot of sober commitments. Actually, how we take sober commitments is that I commit him to doing something, and he stuck doing it. So if you saw the opening act at the Roundup, he was in it. So was I, but he wouldn't have ever volunteered to do something like that. So it's really fun. Get a newcomer, make him do stuff. I'm just kidding. I'm profoundly grateful to be sober. I know it's not me doing it, and I know it takes a village to raise somebody like me. And the generosity and the kindness, the walking, get in the middle of the fold. Follow us, go to the parties, say yes to the commitments. The best way to get to know people is taking a commitment and hanging out with them, doing a commitment. That's how people get to know you, and that's how you get to know them. And just don't drink between meetings. Gordon said it all in the very first meeting. He goes, you want to know how not to drink? Don't take the first drink. Don't listen to your head. It's out to get you. So listen to us until you can have that safety of listening to your own higher power and your own intuition. And we will never steer you wrong, because we don't want anything from you except to give you love. Like, we only want to give you what we've gotten for free, and make sure that you're as equal to us when you walk in that door, and that we need you as much as you need us. So I hope everybody gets to stay sober one more day, and thank you again for allowing me to speak tonight.
Okay. All right. I need somebody to help me tell me why I met. Yeah.
Let's first thank Beverlie for a fabulous pitch. And let's thank Chris for another fabulous pitch. And Majestic for a fabulous job.